I want you to imagine sitting in a conference room at 6 in the morning, your eyes barely open, your body running on nothing but sheer willpower and the memory of what coffee used to taste like, and then, without even realizing it, your head slowly drifts sideways and lands directly on your boss's shoulder. Right there, in front of the entire team, and instead of pulling away, instead of clearing her throat or giving you a sharp nudge under the table, she just stays still. And then, in the quietest, most unexpected voice, she leans just slightly toward you and whispers, "You can sleep if you want." I know. I know how that sounds. I know you're probably already typing in the comments. Was I wrong? Was she strange? Was there something going on between us that I'm not telling you? I promise you, by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what happened, why it happened, and why that one moment, that tiny, seemingly insignificant moment in a freezing cold conference room at dawn, completely changed my life. So tell me right now, before we even get into it, have you ever been so exhausted that your body just made a decision without consulting your brain? Because that's exactly where this story begins. Let me take you back about 2 years, to a version of myself that I'm honestly a little heartbroken thinking about. I was 26 years old, freshly relocated to a new city, and I had just started a job at a mid-sized logistics and supply chain company. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't the dream, but it was a paycheck, it was health insurance, and after the year I had just come through, those two things felt like absolute luxuries. You see, the 12 months before I took that job had been, without exaggeration, the hardest of my entire life. I had gone through a brutal breakup with someone I genuinely thought I was going to marry. My father had been hospitalized twice, once for his heart, once for a fall that turned out to be more serious than we initially understood. My apartment lease had ended, and I'd had to move back in with my mother temporarily, which at 25 felt like the universe was personally laughing at me. And then the company I was working for at the time announced layoffs, and my position was eliminated. All of that, in 1 year. So when I say I showed up to that new job running on fumes, I mean it in the most literal, cellular, bone-deep way possible. My new workplace was one of those offices that prided itself on hustle culture. You know the type. Motivational posters on the walls, a ping-pong table nobody ever used because everyone was too busy, and a very loud, very performative energy of "we're a family here" that I had learned from past experience to be slightly skeptical of. But the salary was better than anything else I'd been offered, and the role, operations coordinator, actually seemed like something I could grow in. So I pushed my cynicism down, ironed my nicest shirt, and showed up on my first day ready to at least try. My direct manager was a woman named Caroline. She was in her late 30s, sharp in a way that you noticed immediately, the kind of person whose brain you could almost see working behind her eyes when she was listening to you. She wasn't warm in the obvious way. She didn't offer a lot of smiles or small talk, but she was fair, she was precise, and from day one, she gave me real work to do instead of busy work, which I respected enormously. She explained my responsibilities clearly, gave me access to the systems I needed, checked in twice that first week without micromanaging, and then largely let me figure things out on my own. For someone who had been burned by chaotic, disorganized management before, she felt like a breath of fresh air. The first month was hard but manageable. I was learning fast, making mistakes but recovering from them, and slowly starting to understand the rhythms of the office. But then we entered what my colleagues grimly referred to as Q4 season. For a logistics company, the fourth quarter is essentially a controlled disaster. Every client wants everything faster, every deadline gets moved up, every system gets stress tested to its absolute limit, and the team was small. Smaller than it probably should have been for the volume of work we were handling. People were routinely staying until 8 or 9 at night. Emails were being sent at midnight and responded to before 6 in the morning. I was new, I was eager to prove myself, and I was absolutely terrible at saying no or admitting that I was struggling. I started waking up at 5 in the morning to get ahead of things. I stopped cooking real meals and existed mostly on vending machine snacks and whatever was left in the office kitchen. I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night on the good nights. And I told myself it was fine. It was temporary. Q4 ends. This is just what dedication looks like. But my body was keeping a very different record of what was happening to it, and it was waiting patiently to present me with the bill. The morning everything came to a head was a Tuesday in early November. We had a large client review scheduled. One of those meetings where multiple departments come together and you sit around a big table and walk through performance metrics and upcoming projections. These meetings were important. They were not the place to be anything less than sharp and present. I knew this. I had prepared for it. I had stayed late the night before organizing my notes and data. I had set 3 alarms, and yet, when my first alarm went off at 5 that morning, I had only been asleep for 2 hours. I'd been working until nearly 3, hit a wall, thought I'd close my eyes for a moment, and the next thing I knew, it was 5 and my body felt like it was filled with wet concrete. I got up anyway. I got dressed. I made coffee that I could barely taste. I drove to the office in that specific kind of tired where you're functioning but you're not quite inside your own body. You're watching yourself from somewhere slightly behind your own eyes. I sat down in the conference room. There were about 12 of us around the table. Caroline was at the head, pulling up the presentation, exchanging a few quick words with the head of the client services team. I had my notebook in front of me and my coffee in my hand, and I remember thinking very clearly, just get through the first 30 minutes and you'll wake up. Just stay upright for 30 minutes. I did not make it 30 minutes. I don't even think I made it 15. The room was warm. The presentation was being walked through in that calm, measured cadence that meetings always have. And my eyelids, which had been staging a quiet protest since 5 that morning, finally won. I felt my head get heavy. I felt myself listing slightly to the right. And then, I don't know exactly when, I was no longer listing. I had landed. My head was resting on something that was not the back of my chair. It was softer than my chair. It was someone's shoulder. And even in that half-conscious state, some part of my brain registered this with absolute horror. But my body, traitorous and exhausted and completely done with my ambitious morning plans, did not move. I don't know how long I was there. It felt like seconds. It could have been minutes. What I do know is that I became aware of being awake again through a very gradual process, the way you surface from deep water. And the first thing I was conscious of was the texture of fabric against my cheek and the sound of someone speaking quietly and the very slow, dawning, catastrophic realization of where I was and what I was resting on. I lifted my head. I turned. Caroline was sitting exactly where she had been, looking forward at the presentation, and she did not look at me immediately when I moved. But after a beat, she turned her head just slightly in my direction, and her voice was so quiet that only I could have heard it, and she said, "You can sleep if you want." I think I actually stopped breathing for a second. I didn't know what to do with those words. I didn't know what to do with the fact that she was calm, that she wasn't embarrassed or annoyed, that she was just looking at me with something that I could only describe as gentle. I straightened up immediately and whispered that I was so sorry, and she just gave a small shake of her head, like it was nothing, and turned back to the presentation. I spent the rest of that meeting in a state of absolute mortified alertness, because nothing wakes you up quite like wanting to dissolve through the floor. So here's where I need to pause, because this is the part of the story where everything that came after was shaped by what I decided to do next. I could have pretended it never happened. I could have avoided Caroline for a week and hoped it faded into office legend without ever being directly addressed. Or I could go to her office after that meeting, look her in the eye, and apologize properly. And I want you to think about that for a second, because I was genuinely torn. Part of me was so ashamed that facing it head-on felt impossible, but another part of me knew that this woman had just shown me an unusual amount of grace, and that she deserved a real acknowledgement of that, not my embarrassment-driven avoidance. So before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause right now and drop a comment below. What would you have done? Would you have addressed it directly or quietly let it go? Because the choice I made completely changed the direction of what came next. I went to her office. I knocked on the open door and she looked up from her screen and I said, "Do you have 2 minutes?" She gestured to the chair across from her desk and I sat down and I just told her the truth. I told her I had been sleeping about 4 hours a night for the past 6 weeks. I told her I knew that was my own doing and that I wasn't looking for sympathy, but that I wanted her to know that what happened in that meeting was not a reflection of how seriously I took my job or her time. I told her I was embarrassed and that I was sorry, and I stopped talking because I'd said everything I needed to say. She was quiet for a moment. And then she said something that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "I noticed you've been here before anyone else and leaving after most people for weeks. I should have said something sooner. That's on me, not you." She paused, and then she said, "The fact that you fell asleep in that meeting tells me you've been running yourself into the ground. The fact that you came in here to apologize tells me who you are. Both of those things matter to me." She told me to take the afternoon. She told me to go home, sleep, eat a real meal, and come back the next day. She said the work would be there. She said I would be more useful to the team as a rested person than as an exhausted one trying to perform wellness. And she said it without any hint of condescension, without making me feel small or weak for struggling. She said it the way you'd talk to someone whose well-being you actually cared about. I went home. I slept for 11 hours. I woke up and I cried a little, honestly, because I hadn't realized how much I had needed someone to just tell me it was okay to stop, even briefly. I had been so locked into this idea that slowing down was failure, that needing rest was weakness, that the only way to prove I belonged in that job was to outwork my own human limitations. And this woman, my boss, who owed me nothing beyond professional management, had looked at me in my most embarrassing moment and responded with something that felt genuinely like kindness. What happened after that was gradual but real. Caroline started checking in with me differently, not about deliverables but about capacity. "What does your plate look like this week?" she'd ask. "Where are you feeling stretched?" She started advocating in resource meetings for the team to get an additional coordinator, which we eventually did. She restructured some of the early morning meeting schedules to start at 7 instead of 6, which sounds small but made an enormous difference for everyone. She created what she called a no hero hours rule, meaning if someone on our team was consistently working past 7 p.m., it wasn't something to be proud of, it was a flag that something in the workflow needed fixing. I watched the culture of the team shift over the following months in ways that were quiet but profound. And my relationship with her changed too. Not inappropriately. I want to be clear about that, because I know some of you are waiting for that particular twist and it's not coming. What changed was that I stopped performing for her. I stopped trying to seem like I had everything handled when I didn't. I started being honest when I was confused, when a deadline felt unrealistic, when I needed help. And because I was honest, she could actually manage the team effectively. She told me once, months later, that the thing she valued most in a team member wasn't raw talent or even work ethic. It was honesty about capacity, because you can solve resource problems when you can see them, and you can't solve the ones people are hiding. I stayed at that company for another 1.5 years after that morning in the conference room. I was promoted once, took on more responsibility, and genuinely loved the work in a way I hadn't expected to when I first walked through those doors. When I eventually decided to move on, for a role in a different city that was too good to pass up, Caroline wrote my recommendation letter. I read it before I sent it, and I had to sit down, because the way she described me made me feel like the person I had always hoped I was, but had never quite been confident enough to claim. The last thing she said to me on my final day was this: "You're going to have a lot of bosses in your life. Some of them are going to see you, and some of them aren't. The ones who do, stay close to them. The ones who don't, learn what you can and keep moving." I think about that a lot. I think about how one moment of unguarded accidental vulnerability, my head dropping onto her shoulder in a conference room when my body simply refused to pretend anymore, opened a door to being actually seen by someone who had real power to affect my life. I think about how I almost didn't go to her office afterward. I think about how differently everything might have unfolded if she had reacted with embarrassment or irritation instead of grace. There's something in this story about what real leadership looks like. Not the motivational poster version, not the hustle culture performance of it, but the actual thing, which I think is about seeing the humans in front of you clearly enough to respond to what they actually need, rather than what's most convenient. Caroline didn't have to say what she said. She didn't have to let me sleep, didn't have to respond with gentleness, didn't have to create space in her afternoon for my apology or treat my honesty like something worth honoring. She chose all of that. And every one of those choices added up to a work environment where people could actually function, actually grow, actually tell the truth. I've tried to carry that with me into every professional relationship I've had since. If you've ever been the exhausted person in the room, the one white-knuckling it through a meeting on no sleep and sheer stubbornness, first of all, I see you, I was you. And second, please hear this. Your limits are not your failures. Needing rest is not weakness. And if you're in any kind of position where you manage or mentor or simply influence other people, I hope you remember that the way you respond to someone in their most vulnerable, unpolished moment will stay with them longer than almost anything else you ever do. Because I still remember exactly what she said, word for word, 2 years later. I will probably remember it for the rest of my life. If you were on my side in this story, if you think I was right to be honest with her, if you think she handled it beautifully, if this made you feel something, please give this video a like, because it genuinely helps more people find these stories. And if this is your first time here, please subscribe, because I share personal stories like this one regularly, and I would love for you to be part of this community. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know if you've ever had a boss who truly saw you, or if you've been on the other side of this and shown that kind of grace to someone else. Both sides of that story matter. Thank you so much for watching and for giving this your time. I'll see you all in the next story.